Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how the London School of Economics have identified a major problem with some of the biggest economies in the world, including the UK, and although they simply observe and draw no firm conclusions about what will happen, I'm going to say this is yet another reason which will force even the Tories to get back on board with the EU, and it's related to birth rate. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you stay notified. So I've said before, I am utterly convinced that the UK will join the EU again. We won't be waiting decades before we realise we need to. It's not my firm belief that being in the EU is overwhelmingly in British interest that feeds that confidence. I've no confidence that the British interest is seen by the general public. In fact, ironically, the reason I'm going to discuss in this video is another case of people not realising what is in our interest. It's another irony of Brexit moment. So what's this about? Well, the LSE published a blog discussing birth rates. They focus in on a metric called total fertility rate. Now, this is the average number of people, children, they are people, born to women between 15 and 49. The children are not born between 15 and 49, it's the mothers. And in any society set for population growth, the figure is above 2.1. If it drops below that value, then you are going to see population decline unless you prop it up with immigration. More on that in a moment. The blog noted that the value, remember 2.1 is the tipping point, the value in England and Wales in 2023 was 1.44. So we're well past the point. We passed the point long ago. They also said that it can take longer in some countries than others for to go from below 2.1 to actual decline. Happened in a couple of years in Germany, they said, but it took 50 years in the UK. But it has happened, with 30 years being the median. So countries who are just dipping below the 2.1 now, they on average will have decades to deal with it. So presumably governments in charge right now will probably feel, well, that's a problem for someone later on. But we are seeing it now. But you may say, well, I feel I've just seen an article saying that the UK population is going to soar to 72 million by 2032. But, well, first of all, this is hardly soaring. It's the same general rate we've experienced going right back to the 19th century. In fact, if that figure is accurate, it would represent a lower percentage increase in the population than the previous 8 years. And the previous 8 years saw our politics dominated by Brexit and anti-immigration rhetoric. So, yeah. The other thing as well, if you've seen those articles in the Tory press, you will also note that their headlines point to this soaring being down to net migration. And this is true. The increase will be down to net migration. Although the LSE blog made no mention, this is one of the irresistible pressures which will carry us back to the EU. How so? Well, our domestic population is in decline. It's happening right now. But our economy works on the basis of needing more workers in order to grow the economy so that we can afford to maintain an expanding retired population. Now, the LSE does point out this idea of having to grow the economy is quite modern. For most of our history, they say, it didn't actually happen, no one really cared. But we forged an economic model which relies on continued growth. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses. But it's a model which simply can't function unless your population keeps growing, and it's not doing. And it's not just the UK. Think of a major economy in the world, and according to the LSE, it's almost certainly declining as well. Indonesia is just above the 2.1 value, but only just, so they're not far off. But others are already seeing negative birth rates. And then think back to every report produced on the UK economy over the last few years. What do they all say? What little growth we've had has been entirely down to immigration. The domestic population hasn't boosted the economy at all. But there's a general feeling amongst the population that immigration should be lower. Even members of the public who are positive about the impacts of immigration think that the levels are nonetheless too high. So in terms of UK politics at least, because Scotland's a bit different, there's a settled view that immigration should be restricted more than it already is, but economically it's already been restricted too much. You know, this despite the fact that the politicians know full well this is choking our economic growth. But politics trumps everything. So, imagine you're a politician at the top of government right now, or hoping to be in the future, because this might be more relevant in 10 years' time. You are faced with two ironclad political facts. The first, The public want immigration kept significantly below the level the economy demands, meaning that you are shutting off ways to grow your economy. But second, that same public who demand lower immigration also want economic growth. Well, this sounds like a bit of an impossible ask. And if you're a politician who wants to be in power for a while, you are going to have to square that circle. You can't just shout at the public, will you make your mind up, because you can't have both of those. And what's interesting is that this is already having an impact now, but will be felt much more keenly in the next decade. So what do you do? Well, one option is to shrink the size of your retired population. Last year, Liz Truss suggested that the retirement age, which is 66 at the moment, but will be 67 by the time I get there, should be raised to 80. Good luck forming an election-winning strategy on that policy. And even that wouldn't be enormously helpful, because what would you be doing? You'd be trying to replace a young, fit migrant workforce with an ageing, increasingly unfit and unwell domestic one. You would just replace the state pension with like out-of-work benefits for like 70-year-olds. Some workers are obviously going to contribute more to GDP than others, yeah? Nobody has yet suggested the Logan's Run scenario, but give it a few years and Mark Francois or Nigel Farage will start talking about it. People with 7-digit sums in the bank excluded, presumably, to take themselves out of the frame. The pension age will, of course, keep ticking up, but it's not going to do so on such an accelerated trajectory of the sort Truss is arguing for. And this isn't a problem that we're facing in a few decades. It's a problem we're facing right now. So what else do you do? You need a way of growing the economy. Otherwise, people will see that established politics has failed. And do you know what? They'll send the extremists into power. So your only option is to remove other barriers to growth. Labour's deregulation to accelerate infrastructure growth is causing a little bit of uneasiness. There's no sign yet that it will lead to lower standards, but that is going to be the fear. But the reason the government are doing it is simply because they have got to turn around 14 years of Tory neglect and decline very quickly. Otherwise, the extremists are knocking on the door. They can't risk losing the next election. But if, let's say the job gets completed, let's say their decade of renewal takes a decade and it's all fine. It's like, right, we're on an even keel now. We just need to keep it ticking over. So then you start to tighten regulations again because you no longer need that accelerated building programme. Are you going to do that if growth is still fragile and Nigel Farage is still stinking Parliament out with booze and tobacco? But surely the easiest way to reduce trade barriers would be joining the EU. I'm still hopeful we'll be making this decision inside the next decade. But let's say we don't. Think about the UK in the mid-2030s. The population's declining because governments had to reduce immigration below what is economically useful, but our domestic population's in decline. This also means fewer taxes per person because migrant workers pay more tax than UK citizens earning the same money. So the tax rate has to go up. AI might float productivity with a smaller workforce, sure, but the problem with boosting the productivity of individual workers is the money generated tends to float upwards and then offshore. So tax receipts will suffer, which are needed for both the public services and state pensions, which are needed to maintain that retired population. Also in 10 years' time, way more of the generation who supported Brexit will no longer be with us. We're already at the point where statistically there will be as many Remain voters alive now as Leave voters. In 10 years' time, the population will be much more strongly pro-EU. And the prospect of being inside the single market and customs union may be the last remaining way to boost the economy. After all, if it's between that and not letting people retire until they're dead, which path is the government likely to choose? As far as I'm concerned, the fight to join the EU is not actually a fight to persuade people we should join the EU. That'll naturally happen in time. It's the fight to persuade people to do it sooner rather than later. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.